Masechet Hagigah Daf Yod Het. We are going to be talking on the first Amud about laws of Chol HaMoed, and then on the second daf we are getting into laws of Tumah and Tahara that we will continue with for the rest of the Masechet. All right, we were speaking about Shavuot. Shavuot is only one day, but that's not enough time to bring all the korbanot. And so for Shavuot, we have 6 days of tashlumin on which one can bring any korbanot that you didn't get a chance to bring on the first day, on Yom Tov, called Yom Tiboach. Especially the second day would be a big celebration. We saw two derivations for this halacha, that there are more days added to Shavuot in order to do tashlumin, and right now we're going to see a third and last. Beresh Lakish Amar v'chag hakasir ezu chag she'ata chogeg v'koser ba bo heve omer ze aseret. Shavuot is also called the festival of harvest. Right, all the different names of the holidays that we learned in first grade are coming in handy now. And so, what is a day on which you can also harvest? That you can go and cut grain on Yom Tov. And generally, you cannot cut grain on Yom Tov. You can cook and you can prepare and go from the start of with kneading dough, but you can't go back and cut it. So how could you call it Chag HaKasir? It has to be Shavuot. What day of Shavuot? Emat. If it's talking about the actual day of Shavuot, Yom Tov, are we allowed to cut grain on Yom Tov? It's not allowed. Not any day. Not even Shavuot. Rather, this is referring to an added day, not Shavuot itself, but a day after. So that day after, that's what's referring to, that it's Chag. It's not Yom Tov, but it has some aspect of Shavuot because you can use it for a tashlumin, even though it's a day on which you are allowed to do work. And that's why it's called Hakatzir. That's the Shakish's proof. Amar Rabbi Yochanan is going to challenge it. Ela me'ata Chag Hasif. Ezu Chag sheyesh bo asifa. Have omer ze Chag Sukkot. I could do the same thing you just heard with Chag Kasir with Sukkot, which is called Chag Hasif, in which you're gathering all the grain dried out all summer, and now you're putting it into the granary. So what's a day? What's a holiday on which you're allowed to gather? Because that's also a melacha. Sukkot. So okay, this is Sukkot. Emat. What day of Sukkot? Can't be Yom Tov of Sukkot, the first day, because you can't do melacha. So maybe it's talking about the Chol HaMoed, the rest of the days of Sukkot. But is that permitted on Chol HaMoed itself? Chol HaMoed also is prohibited in melacha, not as stringently as Yom Tov. You're allowed to do certain things, but nevertheless, you can't just go and gather your whole field. It's not a regular day of Chol. Rather, Rabbi Yochanan says the peshat of the pasuk, and this is the peshat of the pasuk. It means the holiday that we celebrate at the time of the gathering of the grain, right? That's exactly why it's called that. This is the time of the gathering. We're so thankful and feel gratitude that, we got our paycheck for the year. And so this is the holiday surrounding the gathering. So too regarding Shavuot, we call it Chag, Torah calls it Chag HaKasir because it's the holiday at the time of the harvest. Not that you're actually harvesting on the holiday itself. And so, with that, Rabbi Yochanan removes the Resh Lakish's proof quite convincingly. I think it's a good example of you're seeing that the Amoraim did know what the Peshat was, and when they make a midrash, right, they're reading, they know that they're reading into it. All right, so Rabbi Yochanan disparages this proof. Nevertheless, we're going to learn something interesting from this very discussion. Both agree that Chol HaMoed itself, one may not do melacha, right? That was the essence of Rabbi Yochanan's proof, right? That it can't be talking about Chol HaMoed because you can't do asifa on Chol HaMoed either. So even though they disagree regarding is this a good source or not, everyone agrees that Chol HaMoed, you cannot do melacha. And now we want to know the source. We're going to bring a few sources for this really fundamental idea that Chol HaMoed is asur b'melacha. Really, this sugya that we're about to read belongs as an introduction to Masechet Besah, which was about rather Moed Katan, right, which was all about the laws of Chol HaMoed. And we did make reference to some of the ideas here, but this is the main source for prohibition of melacha on Chol HaMoed. Mina hanemile, the Tanu Rabbanan, et Chag HaMasot Tishmor, Shivat Yamim, Limed al Cholosh HaMoed, Shasur B'asiyat Melacha, Divrei Rabbi Yoshia. Rabbi Yoshia has a very nice, straightforward proof, as says the Chag HaMasot Tishmor. Anytime you see the word Tishmor, it means be careful, meaning don't do melacha. Right, refrain from doing melacha, and then it says Shivat Yamim. So there you go. Don't do melacha for all 7 days of Chag HaMasot. Now, of course, it's the first day is going to be Yom Tov. Like, really don't do melacha. The other days are going to be more lenient. That if it's a financial loss, the reasons, and it's permitted. Nevertheless, all 7 days we have the word Tishmor applies to them. Okay, that's proof number one. However, Rabbi Yonatan Omer, Eno Sarich, Rabbi Yonatan says, I don't think that's what the pasuk means, and I don't need your derivation. That doesn't really necessarily mean that. Tishmor, maybe just the first day. I have a different one. Kal v'chomer, a logical proof. Umar Rishon u'Shvi'i, she'en kedusha lifnehen u'lacharehen, asur b'asiyat melacha, cholosh hamoed sheyesh kedusha lifnehen u'lacharehen, and nodin she'eh asur b'asiyat melacha. So listen to this proof. The first and seventh days of Pesach do not have holiness before them. That's the first day. The day before the first day is a regular day, and the day after the seventh day is a regular chol day. And yet, those days you cannot do melacha. Then all the more so the middle days of Chol HaMoed, which are surrounded, they're sandwiched by a Yom Tov before and a Yom Tov after. So they should be at least as holy and stringent as the first and seventh day. So the first and seventh day that aren't fully surrounded are asur b'melacha. And the middle days that are fully surrounded, for sure, are asurin b'melacha. Okay, I mean, according to this, if you take this Kal v'chomer literally, it would mean that you really can't do melacha at all on like the level of Yom Tov. I'm sure that's not what he means, but he means that still we learn some prohibition of melacha. Good. Now we are going to challenge it. Hold on. We've just finished Shabbat, right? And Shabbat's going to come up again next week. So you can say the same thing, that all the days from one Shabbat to the other, since they're sandwiched by a day of melacha, by days of no melacha, so all 6 days of the week should also be prohibited in melacha, and then you'd never be able to do melacha your whole life. that would be ad absurdum. So that's a good challenge. But then we say no. So we uphold the Kal v'chomer and say no. The 6 days of creation don't have a korban musaf. They're not special in any way. Whereas Chol HaMoed, you have korban musaf, so it's clearly they are days of holiday. So therefore, they already have potential to have no melacha, and so the Kal v'chomer works there, and it makes sense, even though it doesn't. No need to bring in this Sheshim Bereshit are not comparable. All right, so now we're good. The Kal v'chomer stands. We're going to challenge it again. Rosh Chodesh yochiach sheyesh bo korban musaf u'mutar b'asiyat melacha. Rosh Chodesh has korban musaf, and yet you can do melacha on Rosh Chodesh, and this proves that melacha and musaf have nothing to do with each other, right? It makes no difference that Chol HaMoed has musaf and the 6 days of the week don't have musaf. Here's a case of musaf and no melacha. So now this Kal v'chomer is challenged. We answer, Rosh Chodesh and karu mikra kodesh. Chol HaMoed is called a holy convocation, the special days. Rosh Chodesh is not called that. So leave out Rosh Chodesh and don't bring me any proof from there. Since the holidays are called Mikra Kodesh, now Chol HaMoed are never directly called Mikra Kodesh, but it does say at the end, right? Ele Moadei Hashem Mikra Kodesh, referring to all of the holidays in the paragraph. And so since Chol HaMoed is included and called Mikra Kodesh, they have potential to be holidays and no melacha. In that case, the Kal v'chomer works. Whereas there's no need to compare it to the 6 days of creation or Rosh Chodesh. Those are not called Mikra Kodesh. And so the Kal v'chomer stands. All right, so far we had two proofs that one may not do melacha on Chol HaMoed, and there's another one. Tanya idach. Kol melechet avodah lo ta'asu. This is talking about Sukkot. So this is saying that the first day is Mikra Kodesh, don't do any melacha, and the pasuk immediately after says Shivat Yamim. Takribu Ishel Hashem. So limed al Chol Shema'ed Shasu b'melacha. So since it says all the first day you cannot do melacha lo ta'asu, and immediately followed by Shivat Yamim, so we learn that all 7 days are included in that prohibition. All right. Rabbi Akiva says, I agree with your halacha, but I have another way of deriving it. When it says these days are Mikra'e Kodesh, or holy, meaning no melacha, what is that referring to? That pasuk that introduces all the list of the holidays. In Barishon, if you're at the first day of the holiday, it already says Shabbaton, so it can't do melacha. In Bashivi'i, if you're at the 7th day of Pesach, that's also called Shabbaton. So I don't need the pasuk of Ele Moadeh to refer to that. So therefore, Mikra Kodesh refers to Chol HaMoed, and that shows that is Asur B'Melacha. So there you go. That's Rabbi Akiva, a nice simple way. That's 4. All right, 5th way of learning no melacha of Chol HaMoed. Tanya idach. Sheshet yamim tochal masot ubayom hashevi'i aseret la'Adonai. Ma shevi'i asur, af sheshet yamim asurin. So this is learning from a similar halacha, but this one in Devarim, about Pesach, that says 6 days to eat matzot, and on the 7th day. This bayom is connecting all 7 days. So to what came before, just like the 7th day you cannot do melacha, so to the 6 days you cannot do melacha because it's included in it. 6 days bayom hashevi'i, so the 6 days of the same law as the 7th. Now you might say, see, look at the hair of HaShivi'i, the 7th day. That makes it sound like the 7th day is special and different from the rest. So if you would think that just like on the 7th day, you can't do melacha, so too the other 6 days, you cannot do melacha at all, even for Davar HaAved, for a loss. Only the 7th has an absolute prohibition of melacha, and the 6 days, the other 6 days do not have an absolute prohibition. And this is an extremely important line to remember. You see here that the Katuv, scripture, handed it over to the Chachamim, meaning authorized, to authorize the sages of future generations. It's up to the sages to tell you which day is prohibited, which day is permitted. Well, they do that when they set the calendar and decide what day is Rosh Chodesh. They actually decide what day is the holiday. And on Chol HaMoed, what exactly is prohibited and what exactly is permitted. The Torah leaves it open-ended. So it just gives a general guideline and says that the 7th day, that's totally prohibited. The six days are in between. They are connected, and so somewhat prohibited in melacha, but not totally prohibited in melacha. You want to know the exact definition? Go ask your local rabbi. And so there you go. We learned this from this baraita, that there is permission given to future generations to explain the Pesukim. All right, wonderful idea. We get to the end of the Mishnah, which mentioned that the days of the Yom Tiboach, the day of slaughtering all of the animals, was a happy day. And in general, if it fell out during the middle of the week, the Kohen Gadol would come in his fine clothing, like he would on Yom Tov, and celebrate. And people would not give eulogies and would not fast, because this is like a Yom Tov, right? The day coming after Shavuot, if it's a regular weekday. But if it's on Sunday, meaning if Shavuot is on Saturday, and the Yom Tiboach is on Sunday, in that case, the people would, the halacha is that we limit the celebration. Kohen Gadol, we say, you wear regular clothes, don't be involved. And you can eulogize and fast because of the Sadducees and Bothusians, the sectarians who said that Shavuot is on Sunday, we don't want them to make a mistake and think, oh, see, they're celebrating on Sunday, even though Vav Sivan is actually on Saturday. We don't want them to use that as ammunition. And so we lower the level of celebration on that day. Okay, we have a question from a story. Alexa Belod. Alexa once died in Lod, so Google had a big celebration when Alexa died. No, we don't know who this is. Some person who died in the city of Lod. ונכנסו כל ישראל לסופתו, ולא הניחם רבי טרפון מפני שיום טוב של עשרת היה. Okay, Alexa, man's name, short for Alexander. And everybody came. He was an important person. Everybody came to eulogize him. And Rabbi Tarfon said, no, you can't do this because it's Shavuot. That's the story. Now, what exactly happened? Yom Tov Salkatatech, was it actually the day of Yom Tov of Shavuot? Yom Tov Mika'atu, would anybody come? Everybody knows that you're not going to have a big public funeral on Yom Tov. You're not going to eulogize on Yom Tov. So nobody would come then. It must have been the day of slaughtering. And everybody came. And so that's the question. The Mishnah said that you may not come on Yom Tiboch because we want to exclude the heretics, and so we say eulogy. You should eulogize. And here the Rabbi Tarfon sent everybody home and said, "Oh, it's Rabbi Tarfon said, no, you have to go home. You're not allowed to." So what's going on here? And the answer is actually quite simple. When we're talking about Yom Tov that happens right after Shabbat on Sunday, that's where the Mishnah said that you're allowed to have eulogies and make it a Saturday in order to exclude the heretics. But in this story, it was Yom Tov that was Yom Tov Shechaliot Bashabbat. Sorry, the other way around, right? When there's Yom Tov that's after Shabbat, then Bashabbat that occurs. Okay, well, it depends if you interpret Shabbat as Shabbat or during the week. Okay, if it's Yom Tov that's on Shabbat itself, and then Sunday is going to be the Yom Tiboach, that is the problem. But this story happened when Yom Tov was not on Shabbat. Yom Tov was, meaning Shavuot was on Sunday, Yom Tiboach was on Monday, so that's why no eulogizing. That's what it was talking about when the Rabbi Tarfon said go home. But the Mishnah was talking about when Shavuot is on Shabbat, then we allow eulogizing on Sunday to counteract the Sadducees. All right, and that is the end of that Mishnah. And now we begin the section on Tumah and Tahara. Okay, why is there a long section about Tumah and Tahara laws here in Masechet Hagigah? What does that have to do with anything? A simple answer is that before you make Aliyah Laregel, before you bring your Korban Hagigah, you have to be Tahor. So everybody makes sure to purify themselves before the holiday so that they can come to the Bet HaMikdash and participate in all of the sacrifices. So since we need to know that, we need to know the details, and there's different levels of Tumah that one would need to know for participating, especially in a Korban. It would be a very high level of Tahara that you need to be careful of. All right, so we begin with Notlin Layadayim. So already these first two words are very important. We know that we do Netilat Yadayim before eating bread. We're going to see the derivation for that today. Now, Netilat Yadayim is only the Rabbanan. From a biblical level, either your whole body is tahor or your whole body is tameh. Right? If your hands touch something tameh, that can transfer impurity, then your whole body becomes tameh, not only your hands. So the idea of hand impurity is only an added level mid-rabbanan that the rabbis at first applied to kohanim because they wanted kohanim to be extra careful. So therefore, be careful what your hands touch, and wash, if you're not sure, wash your hands. If your kohanim are going to eat terumah, they have to wash their hands. Later on, it became expanded to even non-kohanim. so that number one, we'll all be careful, and also because we want to elevate, even non-Kohanim should act like Kohanim. We want to elevate ourselves, even though there's no Bet HaMikdash, we don't have Terumah. Nevertheless, we should all act, even within our homes, right? We make our dining room table like a Mizbeach when we say Divrei Torah on it. There's lots of things that we do to elevate our own regular lives to be like Mikdash, like Kohanim. And so that's why we all wash hands. Okay, but anyway, netilat netlin layadayim. The Mishnah is going to say, when do you have to wash hands? La chulin, ve'la maaser, ve'la tiruma, ve'la kodesh matpilin, ve'la chatat im nitmeu yadav nitma gufo. We're going to see here 5 levels of types of food that are increasing levels of holiness, and the more holy, the more susceptible to tum'ah. That's the general rule. So chulin is the first level, the lowest level, and this refers to regular food that we eat every day that are just secular food, nothing special about them. Even though it's regular food, one has to wash netilat yadayim before eating it. We'll see why. Maaser is referring here to maaser sheni, that every person, every farmer takes on his own to Jerusalem and eats in Jerusalem, which means not only Kohanim, everyone's eating this mas or Leviim, everyone's eating Maaser Sheni. If you want to eat Maaser Sheni, you have to wash your hands first, Netilat Yadayim. Vela Tiruma. Tiruma now is a higher level of holiness. Only Kohanim can eat it, and they have to be Tehorim. And so therefore, before they eat it, for sure, they have to do Netilat Yadayim. That's assuming that they're already tahor, right? If they actually are tameh, they have to go to a mikveh. But assuming they're tahor in a regular way, they have to also do netilat yadayim right before. Ve'la kodesh matbilin. So the first 3 categories, you could do just netilat yadayim. For kodesh, if you're going to eat a korban, either a kohen eating korban or Yisrael eating the shalamim, the things that they are allowed to eat, one has to not just wash his hands with a cup, but actually immerse one's hands in a mikveh. By the way, that's permitted. That's a higher level of tahara. If you're at the beach and want to eat a sandwich and you don't have a cup and a faucet, no problem. You can go dip your hands in the ocean, and that's much even better than washing your hands with a cup. Okay, for kodesh, in order to eat sacrificial meat, one must dip his hands in a mikveh. And lachatat is referring to mechatat, the water of para aduma, the water mixed with ashes. That is the highest level kedusha and the most susceptible to tum'ah. And in that case, if a person's hands, or even if only his hands became tameh, even if the person's body is totally tahor according to all biblical laws, nevertheless, nitma gufo, if his hands get hand impurity, according to the Rabbanan, he has to not only wash his hands, but go to the mikveh and wash his whole body. It's as if his whole body became tameh. So there you go. Here's the 5 levels of food impurity. Now, Mishnah continues with more things that have to do with this levels of food impurity. Tava lachulin, huchzak lachulin. Now, regarding tevilah, you go to the mikveh. Let's say I went to the mikveh because I want to eat regular food. Now, you don't actually have to go to the mikveh to eat regular food, right? We don't do that. You can eat regular food while being tameh, or if you're already tahor, there's no need to go. Nevertheless, there were people that wanted to be like Kohanim, and as if everything they're eating is tirumah. We know, for example, that the Dead Sea sect went to the mikveh before every meal. So they did that, and other people too. So if you go to the mikveh for chulin, chuzak lechulin, then you're good to eat chulin, but asur lemaaser. But you cannot yet eat maaser with that tevilah because you didn't have in mind that you're going to eat maaser. Taval lemaaser, if I dunked and having in mind I'm going to eat maaser sheni. Chuzak lemaaser, then you can eat the maaser sheni, but asur letirumah. But let's say you're a kohen, you cannot go and eat tirumah based on that tevilah, because you didn't have it in mind. And then maybe you're not going to be so careful, as you would be for tirumah, right? Although everyone's being careful, there's different levels of being careful, regarding different levels of tumah. When there's diseases around, depending on if it's like a really bad disease going around, you're going to be super super careful, for contagious, and wear a mask and not see anybody. But if it's like a lower level disease, you'll wear a mask, but not so much, and you'll shake hands, right? So just there's different levels of care in regarding contagion. And so if you went to the mikveh for Maaseh Sheni, you can eat teruma. Tavel teruma chuzak the teruma asur lakodesh. If you went to the mikveh so that you be tahor enough to eat teruma, that's great, but you can still not eat kodesh, sacrificial meat, with that tevilah. You have to go to the mikveh again. If you dipped for eating sacrificial meat, that's good for sacrificial meat, but you cannot go and touch the water of para aduma. Tavala chamor mutar lakal. Other way around is fine. If I had in mind I'm going to go to the mikveh for sacrificial meat, and then someone comes and brings some teruma, then it's fine because it's a lower level. So if I was careful enough for kodesh, for sure that's careful enough for the lower level. Let's say I just dunked without having anything in mind, right? I decided to go for a swim in the ocean and dunk for fun, and then I come out and say, oh, look, there's some teruma here. And that's no good for zero, right? Even though technically you dip, so yes, technically you're tahor because you did go to the mikveh, but you didn't have it in mind, and therefore it's no good. Okay, and now another list. Bigdei am haaretz midras la perushin. Bigdei perushin midras lo ochle teruma. Okay, so now we're going to be introduced to some different categories of people. Am haaretz is a person of the land, a regular farmer that they know general halacha, but they're not so careful with the details. So the clothing of an am haaretz is tameh midras. Midras is a high level of tum'ah when a zav or zava or nida sit on something, even if they don't touch it, like if it's under layers, it acquires tum'ah. So the regular clothing of an am haaretz, we have to assume is tameh midras. If you are a perushi, perushi is the same word as Pharisees, and this has more than one definition. Pharisees, we know, were a political party during the time of the Hashmonaim, but over time it seems to have less to do with politics and more to do with a certain interpretation of halacha. Literally, the word perushin means those who separate themselves, and they were very scrupulous to separate from impurity. They would go above and beyond the letter of the law. For example, even for chulin, they would wash their hands or go to the mikveh. So the perushin, since they're more careful than the am haaretz, so they consider the regular clothing of an am haaretz, even if they don't know specifically that this, azaf sat on this piece of this shirt, they consider everything am haaretz has to be tameh. And although they're careful, they're considered the same regarding ochle teruma. So someone who eats teruma, a kohen who's keeping himself on a high level of tahara because he has to eat teruma, when he sees the clothing of a parush, he says, oh, that's tameh midras, because the parushin, although they're more careful than ma'aretz, they're not as careful as the kohanim eating teruma. And so on. Bigdek ochle teruma midras lakodesh. The regular clothing of someone who eats teruma, you have to consider tameh for someone who's going to eat sacrificial meat. Bigdek kodesh midras lachatat, and someone who's gonna handle the para aduma water, he considers the clothing of someone who only eats sacrificial meat to be tameh because he is not as careful as the highest level. And we end the Mishnah with two examples of people. Yosef ben Yoezer. Yosef ben Yoezer was one of the most pious of the Kohanim, and even him, his clothing was considered tameh for kodesh, for someone who wants to eat sacrificial food. In other words, he was very careful regarding teruma because he always eating teruma. But if you were eating kodesh, you would have to stay away from even his clothing. Yochanan ben Gud Geda haya ochel atarat hakodesh kol yamav v'ayta mitpachto midras l'chatat. Yochanan ben Gud Geda was even more careful, and everything he ate at the level of as if it were sacrificial meat. Even if it wasn't, he would go and dip and wash and everything like sacrificial meat. So he's always has the level of being a sacrificial meat eating person. But even for him, his clothing would be considered tameh for someone who is handling the meh chatat, the para aduma waters. So even these great people, right, you show that there's this hierarchy of tum'ah laws, and this probably just gives us a little bit of a sense of the classifications, like the class system of how careful people were in all these different contexts. All right, now the Gemara is going to go back to the beginning and ask, why do you have to wash your hands to eat chulin and maaser? You see, a word of introduction. If someone's hands become tameh, it's only to the banan. Now, what level of tum'ah will the rabbis give a person's hands? We answer sheni letum'ah. Right? There's different levels. There's avi avota tum'ah, is a corpse, and ava tum'ah, rishon, sheni. Right? Food, regular food, cholin, can become sheni letum'ah. But that's it. Because sheni is a low level, regular food that touches some other food will not transfer tum'ah to a third level. The second level is the end for chulin. And so too for hand impurity. Now, tirumah is more susceptible. So a sheni, food that's sheni, if it touches tirumah, makes the tirumah tameh. And if tirumah touches kodesh meat can even go down to a revi'i, right? Because it's so contagious, it's so susceptible to tumah if it's kodesh. Okay, so now hand impurity, the rabbis consider the same as sheni. Therefore, hand impurity can make tirumah and kodesh tameh, because tirumah and kodashim are susceptible to third level impurity. But chulin and maaser sheni are not. They're only susceptible to sheni letumah. They can only be sheni. If one's hands are sheni, then touching chulin or maaser sheni aren't going to make them any more tameh. So why do you have to wash your hands for chulin and maaser? Okay, that's the theory behind the following question, but we're actually asking from a text, which is the Mishnah, that encodes what I just said. What do you mean? Now this is a Mishnah in Bikurim. It says hatirumah vehabikurim, tirumah that you give to the kohen, and bikurim is also the first fruit that you give to the kohen. They have the same law, and their laws are chayavin alen mitah. If either kohen eats them betumah or non-kohen eats them on purpose, it's liable to death. Chomesh, and if they do it by mistake, they have to pay an extra 20%. Asur lezarim, a non-kohen is not allowed to eat them. Then nichse and actually belong monetarily to the kohen. So if the kohen, for example, wants to do kiddushin, marry a woman, with this, he could say, with this tirumah, because it's personal property, even though it's also holy. And if it gets mixed 1 in 100, then it's batel. For most food, it's 1 in 2, right? One non-kosher hot dog falls into 2 kosher hot dogs, you can eat all 3 of them. But tirumah and bikurim, they're not diluted until they're 1 in 100. 101, 1 in 101. Here's the key that we're going to ask, that tirumah and bikurim require washing hands before you eat them. And if your body is tameh, you have to go to the mikveh and wait till it gets nighttime in order to eat tirumah. These laws apply only to tirumah and bikurim, and these are not true regarding maaser sheni, and for sure not true for chulin. So according to the Mishnah Bikurim, you do not have to wash your hands for chulin and maaser. And our Mishnah in Hagigah said you do have to wash your hands for chulin and maaser. That's the question. We have a contradiction. Kasha maaser maaser, kasha chulin chulin. We have 2 contradictions, one regarding maaser, one regarding chulin. Well, let's try to answer at least half of it. Bishlama maaser maaser la kasha, hada bimeir, hada banan. We can explain the contradiction between maaser and Hagigah says you have to wash your hands, and Bikurim says you don't have to wash your hands, because maybe they're actually different authors of these 2 Mishnayot, even though the Mishnayot don't give authorship. But we know that there were sometimes different authorships behind different Mishnayot. What would they say? Ditnan. Now yet another Mishnah, Masechet Para. Kol hataon biyat ma'im divrei sofrim metamet kodesh. Anything that requires being immersed in water, midrabanan, for example, hands, right? Hands can become tameh midrabanan and have to be immersed in water. Anything like that also causes tumah to kodesh. So impure hands will cause tumah to kodesh. Poselata tirumah, and also makes tirumah pasul. Use a different language here because when it makes kodesh tameh, hands are 2nd degree. It'll make kodesh 3rd degree. That kodesh, sacrificial food itself, can touch not other sacrificial food and make it 4th degree. So that's why that's called mitameh. Regarding terumah, we use the word posel because hands are 2nd degree. That can cause terumah to be 3rd degree, but terumah cannot impart any more impurity to other terumah after 3rd degree. That's why it's called pasul. Okay. But impure hands are okay for chulin and maaser according to the Rabbi Meir. So this is there. This is okay. So you see that Rabbi Meir will be the author of the Mishnah in Bikurim. Chachamim omrim b'maaser ela b'maaser. Okay. Chachamim say no. Only Chachamim say regarding maaser. Also becomes tameh. Therefore, right, the Rabbis prohibit osrim. Chachamim osrim b'maaser. They prohibit hand impurity even for maaser sheni. So maaser sheni is in between category. Chachamim are treating maaser sheni like terumah, that also it is susceptible to tum'ah, and you have to wash your hands for maaser sheni. And so Chachamim would be the authors of our Mishnah in Hagigah that says you have to wash for maaser sheni. Rabbi Meir would be the author of the Mishnah in Bikurim that says you don't have to wash. Good. So we can resolve the maaser sheni. Ela chulin kashya. But what about chulin? Everyone agrees that chulin you don't have to wash your hands. So where did our Mishnah get this idea from? And we answer la kashya. Kan ba'achila. Kan b'negi'ah. Our Mishnah in Hagigah is talking about eating. When you eat chulin, then you have to wash your hands. Whereas the Mishnah Bikurim is talking about just touching it. When you touch chulin, you do not have to wash your hands. Like we do today, right? If you touch bread, you don't have to wash your hands. Only if you eat the bread, right? So since it's all to the banan, it's all as a way of adding an extra guard for Kohanim Terumah to elevate ourselves. So you don't have to do the technicality of Tumah actually transfers by touching. We're just going to do it when you're eating, because that's when you're sitting down to a meal, or any eating actually, according to this. Okay, so this would answer it. However, it's not a final answer. Matkif ladav shimi bar ashe ad kan la peligira banana ledri meir ela ba'achila de maaser ava bengina de maaser uba'achila de cholin la pelige. That interpretation that we had of Mishnah Para, here we have a limitation on that machloket, that they only argue, Rabbanan only argue about Rabbi Meir regarding eating maaser. They say if you eat maaser, then you have to wash your hands. But if you only touch maaser, and regarding chulin, no matter what, even eating chulin, they don't disagree, meaning they say eating chulin is totally permitted. So right now we see that everyone agrees that eating chulin, you do not have to wash your hands. And therefore we cannot use this answer because no one thinks that eating chulin, you would have to wash your hands. So we can't use that answer. Rather, the final answer, ela idi v'idi b'achila. Both Mishnayot are talking about eating. When one is eating bread, then, you're already sitting down to a meal. In that case, we're going to impose the stringency, as mentioned in our Mishnah in Hagigah, that you have to wash your hands. But in Mishnah Bikurim, when it excludes chulin, that's talking about eating fruit. When you're just eating fruit, it's just a snack. We're not going to bother people to have to go and wash their hands. Nachman actually says the opposite. If just regular people, wash their hands, not for terumah or anything, but because they want to show how holy they are, that they wash their hands even for fruit, that person is considered haughty of spirit. You're going too much. You'll be more holier than the rabbis tell you that you need to be. Therefore, that's not necessary and not even permitted. And that's how we can reconcile the two Mishnayot. If someone is eating chulin, just regular food, eating fruit, there's a separate halakha altogether. That if the fruit is wet, then you wash your hands. But we're not talking about that. Just eating fruit to wash your hands, no, it should not be done. Only eating bread, even if it's chulin, that's why we wash our hands. And so you see, this is the source of the halakha even until today. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.